Good evening. Welcome to the October 2nd, 2023 Troy City Council meeting. This evening, we're proud to have Councilmember Hoderick provide our invocation, so please rise for that invocation and remain standing for our Pledge of Allegiance.
Father God, we ask for your presence in our council chambers tonight as we deliberate and make decisions on behalf of close to 90,000 of our fellow residents here in the city of Troy. In a time in the past week when we've seen great division at the highest parts of our government, please continue to bless us with our ability to work with one another, deliberate constructively, and with great care on behalf of all of our citizens, as apolitically and as nonpartisan as we can, as our charter calls for. We are blessed that we are privileged to do that, but we will need in these times your continued guidance and presence to keep our relationships strong, to keep our friendships, even through differences, strong. Please protect those in our staff that serve in public safety roles, as that is one of the most critical priorities of the work of our local government. We ask your presence here in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'll call to order the October 2nd, 2023 Troy City Council meeting. As for the roll call from Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Abraham?
Here.
Councilmember Brooks?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Krenga?
Here.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Here.
All present this evening. First up are certificates of recognition and special presentations. We have one C1 legislative update by Senator Michael Weber. I'll call Senator Weber forward and look forward to that update.
Do I need to, is the mic on? All right, awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Mayor Baker, council members, city staff. My name is Michael Weber. I serve as a state senator for the vast majority of Troy, not all of Troy, but the vast majority of Troy, District Number 9. And ideally, I'd like to try to provide these legislative updates at least a couple times a year to the council, and so we'll start with the fall here and work our way hopefully to next spring. But I have a background very similar to a lot of you: 7 years on city council, and then 6 years in the state house. So certainly know the challenges the council members go through in terms of representing their community. A quick update, mainly talking about budget stuff. But I'll start with, we were able to do an extension to the transformational brownfield legislation that's already been in place. This could be a tool, obviously, for some redevelopment eventually for the city, but we were happy to get that done on a bipartisan basis. Actually came through Economic and Community Development, which is a committee that I serve on, but Senator McMurrow, the former senator from Troy, is the chair of, and so that was good bipartisan work there. Obviously, we passed the budget back in June, actually went into effect October 1st, so it went into effect yesterday. As you all know, the main piece that I want to highlight is getting that $10 million in there for the sound wall. We advocated for that, and we were able to get bipartisan support, obviously, for that. This will go with the original $4 million that was previously appropriated to fund 2 sections of sound wall that met the MDOT requirements in their latest study. And we'll have more information in terms of time frame, but our preliminary discussions with MDOT there, it will be a fairly aggressive, by MDOT state government standards, time frame to get that done. So I was happy to hear about that. In terms of revenue sharing, we had a 7% increase in revenue sharing, 5% designated as ongoing, and then 2% as kind of one-time appropriation. So we'll see as we get into January with the next revenue estimating conference where our dollars are and that kind of thing, but that's a good thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about certainty for revenue sharing a little bit down the road. In addition, legislature appropriated more money into the state rainy day fund. We paid down over $500 million in debt on MIPSers, appropriated $1.6 billion in federal grants for increasing broadband access, appropriated over $500 million to invest in drinking water and wastewater improvement projects. And finally, more than $215 million was appropriated for local road repair and local bridge repair as well. So now, I kind of want to finish by talking about the Revenue Sharing Trust Fund bill package, and there has been some movement on that already this fall. So that's a bipartisan package, myself and Jeremy Moss in the Senate, and then Representative O'Neill and Representative Tisdale in the House. Concept was actually introduced last session by Representative Tisdale, Representative Ellison, and it's already gotten some traction in the House. After a lot of discussion and work from Michigan Municipal League and the representatives, they were able to pass the local government committee with unanimous support. So I think that that's a good sign for things to come. What we're trying to do there is we're just trying to provide a little more certainty. It's not necessarily more dollars per se, but it's just more certainty in terms of right now everything goes through the appropriations process. We're trying to kind of put that money aside where it couldn't really be touched by, it would have to be a vote of the legislators to actually take it out, kind of thing. So this is something the Michigan Municipal League has been looking at for a number of years to provide certainty for all of you in terms of what you have. So we are pushing for that. We were pushing in the spring as well, even trying to see if we could get it into the budget process, and weren't quite able to do that, but we're working on it. And it came out of our local government caucus that we have, that Michigan Municipal League helped us put together, and the 4 bill sponsors, including myself, are the 4 co-chairs of that caucus. So we meet periodically. We even had a summer Zoom meeting to talk about local government related issues. So we'll keep you apprised of kind of some of the stuff that we're working on, but it's good because we've got obviously Republicans, Democrats, folks from up north, west side, east side, and so a lot of folks covering a lot of different territory. Lastly, as I do with all these, I just want to, for residents here and at home, if you want more information, you want to sign up for our monthly e-news, you can visit senatormichaelweber.com or call our office at 517-373-0994. So, and with that, that's it.
Thanks, Senator. Any questions from anyone on council while we have you here? You're pretty thorough. Appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. That concludes certificates of recognition and special presentations this evening. We have no carryover items or public hearings. I don't see that anybody has signed up for public comment for items on the agenda from Troy residents and businesses, so there's no need for reply. We have no postponed items, so we move on to regular business. I1 is board and committee appointments. There are no mayoral appointments this evening, and we do have a couple of city council appointments, so I will turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Krenga for those.
Thank you, Mayor. And I do have several this evening. The first one, Animal Control Appeal Board. I'd like to move the appointment of Amin Hashmi to the Animal Control Appeal Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2026. Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Krenga, supported by Councilmember Abraham, that we approve the appointment of Amin Hashmi to the Animal Control Appeal Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2026. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Krenga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Second, Liquor Advisory Committee. I'd like to move the appointment of Annalisa Esposito Bloom to the Liquor Advisory Committee for the term expiring January 31st, 2024.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig, supported by Councilmember Brooks, that we approve the the appointment of Annalisa Esposito Bloom to the Liquor Advisory Committee for the term expiring January 31st, 2024. Any discussion? Vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes, motion carries.
Parks and Recreation Board. I'd like to move the reappointment of Casey Calusi and Kelly Martin to the Parks and Recreation Board, both for the terms expiring September 30th, 2027.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig, supported by Councilmember Hamilton, that we approve the reappointments of Casey Calusi and Kelly Martin to the Parks and Recreation Board for the terms expiring September 30th, 2027. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Traffic Committee. I'd like to move the appointment of Angela Zhou as student representative to the Traffic Committee for the term expiring July 31st, 2024.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that we approve the appointment of Angela Zhou as the student representative to the Traffic Committee for the term expiring July 31st, 2024. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Motion carries. That concludes council appointments this evening. We move on to I2, Board and Committee nominations. I have no nominations this evening, so I'll turn it back over to Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig for City Council nominations.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one, the Animal Control Appeal Board. I'd like to move the nomination of Michelle Haight to the Animal Control Appeal Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2026.
Support. Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig, supported by Councilmember Hamilton, that we approve the nomination of Michelle Haight to the Animal Control Appeal Board for the term expiring September 30th, 2026. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Motion carries. That concludes City Council nominations this evening. We have no closed session requested, so we'll move on to I4, retirement of City Manager Mark F. Miller and new City Manager recruitment. This item will be introduced by City Manager Mark Miller. We also have Jeanette Menig, our Human Resources Director, as well as James Vitrano, from the Vice President of GovHR USA here. And I'll turn it over to City Manager Miller.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. 5 years ago, this day seemed so far away, but now it is fast approaching, and that is, I'm notifying council that my retirement date is May 31st, 2024. My employment agreement requires 60-day notification, so obviously this meets that minimum notification requirement. You know, the initial contract was a 5-year term, which would have expired on December 31st, 23. The purpose of that initial contract, from my standpoint, was that my job was to transition the city in a difficult time and to try to stabilize the community and try to move forward, and then hand over the reins to a new city manager at that point of time, who then hopefully can take the city into some new, I don't want to say new, but continually to improve, because we are in a stable place now, much more than we were 5 years ago. And you know, what I wanted to do in that 5 years was work with a couple important points. One, through openness, transparency, professionalism, and the highest ethical standards. And I think we, when I say we, I mean all of us, myself, all of city staff, and council, the mayor and council have done that. You know, but that work is never done. We're all going to have to continue every day to keep moving forward. It's not easy, because we always are presented challenges. some challenges surprises us out of the blue, and we've had those, and you never really, it's kind of strange, you can't anticipate it. They just blow up, and you don't know where they're coming from. But I just think that is just part of the territory of this job. So in my thinking about this retirement and offering the best route for the city and city council, who has the difficult job of, one, recruiting and hiring a city manager, is I try to determine what the best time would be in the year. And so when I started to look at December 31st, that became apparent that that is a terrible time to recruit, because a starting date of January 1st is in the middle of, it's actually a holiday. And so therefore, I started looking to move forward into the next calendar year, and then what our most important thing in the first half of every calendar year is our budget. So I wanted to provide a commitment to take the city through the budget process, therefore the May 31st deadline. And also I wanted to provide council enough time to do that recruitment, because it does take time to do that. And it may seem like this is far off, but in this process, council is going to have to be nimble and make this happen if you want a candidate to be starting starting on June 1st. So then that takes us to the next part, and that is the recommendation of hiring GovHR USA and James Vitrano, Vice President and the main point of contact, to conduct the search on your behalf. GovHR USA provided 3 options, which gives council the ability to handle any situation come up. And I want to use the example of option C, that would provide individual services kind of a la carte from GovHR, and that might be to help in the transition of a new city manager, or mentoring if that's needed, or something that we just don't know that's outside of the normal recruitment process. So these, and then with that, we have provided HR Director Jeanette Menig to help James. James will be the main point of contact, but any of the background work, when I say background, I mean work that's done that's not noticeable and out front. In other words, paperwork behind the scenes. HR can handle that paperwork and assist James Vitrano and GovHR. With that, we have James here, who is prepared to make a little statement regarding the proposal they have presented to you. And there's just a couple comments that I want to make. That this is City Council's sole job or authority, but I will tell you that this is a difficult job. It is done in the public eye all of the time. It is challenging. It's different. I mean, who else hires someone totally in the open? It doesn't really happen anywhere except for local government. So my hat's off to you. You have a tough job. It's a challenge. And just looking at my notes here. So ultimately, the purchasing recommendation is one where it is recommended that you determine that it's in the public interest and the city would be best served without obtaining bids. So in other words, going with GovHR USA and the RFP that's provided and utilizing whatever option you feel that is the most appropriate. Financially, there's money in contractual services in the HR budget for this. And my only advice to council is that you hire a competent city manager. You give the new city manager the tools to be successful. And I think this is the most important thing, that that person fits in the fabric of both City Hall and the community. And I think that's in this process, that's difficult to do because it's an interview a group interview format. And so I wish you luck in this process. It will be challenging. And I would also just say in conclusion that I've tried my best to provide the best transition for City Council. I know I'm not perfect, and I apologize if my actions have provided any negative outcomes. That was not my intent. My intent was to provide the most options for council and to make your job as easy as possible in this tough circumstances that you're going to be involved in. So with that, I think the mayor and I talked earlier that we're going to ask James to come up and sort of summarize where he's coming from and represent his RFP. And if you have any questions for me, I guess I can answer them too.
Okay. Should we do James first and then go to any questions? All right. James, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council, City Manager Miller. The proposal is pretty straightforward. GovHR has a customized process for each of our clients, but it always starts with making sure we understand what the stakeholders most desire out of the city manager position. I've had the opportunity, blessing, to work with most of you, many of you, all of you at some point in time over the past several years since we did the first search for the City of Troy, which was Mark's position. In addition to stakeholders like council members, the mayor, and employees, we will definitely want to engage the public in this process. And similar to the last search we did, we'll have a multi-step process that you would go through as you narrow in on the candidates. I think that the most important part as you start any search is to make sure you get the biggest, broadest, most diverse pool you can get. And I think that's where GovHR really excels, is our ability to get nationwide. Troy certainly is a nationwide search, and that's how we would treat it. I'm available literally 24/7. Many of you understand that from our prior work with the city, but my goal is to be the facilitator of this process. I'm in no way a decider in this process. I think that's a word still, right? Decider. I am absolutely a facilitator to bring candidates first as a first cut and then as a second cut, but we will do due diligence prior to bringing anyone in front of you, which includes individual Zoom calls with candidates, background with candidates before we bring them to your attention. So that's a summary, a lot of what we've done in the past with the city, but I'm happy to answer any questions, whether it's current market or about the proposal itself.
Thanks, James. Any questions for James specifically? Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Crainga.
Thank you, Mayor. So, James, if I heard you correctly, you actually will headhunt. You will go after looking for folks, not just post a position, but you actually can do headhunting.
Correct. I don't really like headhunting.
I know. I'm not the best phrase.
I'm with you. LinkedIn is a really good friend of mine, and we send a lot of direct messages. I personally send a lot of direct messages through LinkedIn, and it has really become a powerful tool that we use a lot. We've also got a database with hundreds of individuals that have applied for other positions across the country, so we'll run a search on municipalities between 50,000 and 150,000 people, city manager positions, assistant city manager positions. That will spit out a direct list that will reach out to folks that have applied for other positions within the last 5 years, as well as we subscribe to a number of different databases of positions and titles. But of all of those tools, LinkedIn and direct messaging through it is become a really important tool that we use.
So another question, thank you for that, James, is you've raised it in terms of the market.
Sure.
So something I hear is that among city managers, you have an aging population, and the number of new folks coming into the field isn't always matching the folks who are leaving the field. So can you speak to that, and
Sure.
what does that mean for the market, or what we'll be looking for?
I think that's fair, and I think it's that issue of not enough folks entering the market has been a consistent problem for probably over a decade, and that's the important part for Troy, is you're not the first city manager job or an entry-level individual into a large community like this. You're looking for deputies or assistants or city managers who have been in the business of running a department or running a city for a number of years. So you're actually looking at what was the market like 10 years ago, 20 years ago almost, when those folks entered. And I just took a few notes while I was sitting there. And your comparables for Troy are hard. You've got the second highest taxable value in the state of Michigan, only to Ann Arbor. So I don't mean to say any of these specific cities as your direct comparables, but they're recent. And I think you've had a real mix of internal and external candidate placement. Very recently, Grosse Pointe and East Lansing had successful external appointments. Novi and Birmingham had successful internal appointments. Those were all within the last 8 months. But then your other comparables would be Farmington Hills and Ann Arbor, which were in the last couple of years. One was an internal and was an external. We're seeing both happening with your larger comparable cities. Some of the smaller cities, you're seeing more external appointments, but some of the internals, it's a little bit more mixed bag because you're having trouble finding the folks that are willing to leave where their community is right now to come to these larger cities that before it was just made a lot of sense. You were managing a city of 50,000, now you're going to come to Troy and manage a city of 90,000. That progression we're seeing a little bit stunted in the market. Having said all that, which is more words than maybe you bargained for, Troy's an attractive position. You have a stable government, a stable city council, you have a stable workforce, you have a really good quality of life. So I'm excited to get the position out there and see what we can find.
Excellent. One final quick question was just to clarify the relationship between GovHR, yourself, and Jeanette Menning, our head of HR. What does that look like and how you guys will liaise?
Sure, and I'll just harken back to the last search that I did. I worked close with Jeanette and with Lori, and it just depended which piece of the search we were working on. Certainly, we will need things like demographics. I will need things like employee count. I will need things like benefit documents. All of those things, I'm sure, the director of HR will be able to provide, and then I package it up, and then I'll send that back over to the city for review and approval. And actually, it would go to all of you as an informational item, and I would be happy to receive that feedback. Also, we'll be working on things like the wage rate, which also would come from the director of HR. Eventually, as we talk about the contract, I will need direction from City Council or the City Attorney's Office in terms of who and how we coordinate those parts. And I know last time Lori was helpful in helping me navigate that with City Council. So I think both individuals will play a role. Certainly that early background information all will come from Jeanette. And she did a great job last time, and I'm sure she will again.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, James. We've done this before. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years, and thank you, Mark, for helping steer the ship through some tough times, especially a few years ago, but lately it's definitely been a much better place. My first question is, well, if we approve some language of contract tonight, and I'll be supporting the full external internal search what do you see as the timeline on that? Like, when will the recruitment start? How will you interact with city staff and council, and where do you see the process going? When do we start the interviews and all that
Sure.
stuff?
And part of it's going to depend on my questions of you. If we back up from the date you want the individual, you want your selection date. If we back up 120 days, that's the start date. From a standard process, all things in, I may be off by a week or two one way or the other, but it's about 120 days. So if we talk after this and you say, we would like a crossover with our city manager of 2 weeks, of 4 weeks, of whatever that term may be, I can back that up. I'm also very cognizant of your election that's coming up, and I do think that before, even if you approve it this evening, I would wait to work in earnest with the city council until after the conclusion of the election. I do think that that's prudent. That's certainly not a must. It's just something that I would observe for you. So if we were to start in mid-December with those stakeholder engagement, I can get all of the pre-information that won't change based on election, demographics, the recruitment brochure, the recommended ad list, all of that ready for that second half of November, early December, so that we can hit the ground running right around that area, that time. 6 weeks of advertisement will pull us into after the holidays. May even want to pull it just a touch more into February, and then that would give us probably about, I'm going to do that math wrong, I'm sure, but at that point, we still have several weeks before Mark's announced retirement day. There's some discussion. We can discuss, do we start right after the holidays? And we still have a little bit of run time. I can put in recommendation memo form for your consideration, multiple options. But, I will say that City Manager Miller's provided substantial notice. You often don't have this as a recruiter to be able to plan it out as much as we have the opportunity. So I think that's why I'm stumbling a little bit, but 120 days from the day we start is your expectation. And then if someone's employed somewhere, usually it's at the 30 days before they're able to exit their contracts. Mark's is 60 days here, but that's longer than usual. I would say a 30-day is more standard if you keep in the back of your mind as an average of if they are currently employed, what you would have to wait before they could be on ground with you.
Thank you. Yeah, you're also doing the advance, so I hope you get some sleep around the holiday time. But my other just comment is this: I want to make sure that as we go through this process, and I know you're already going to do this anyway, as you have in the past, but the voice of city employees is extremely important to this decision. And 5 years ago, it was thrust upon us. We had to appoint an interim, and then move on from there. This time, Mark was going to stay on till the end, and I really want all candidates to know that we're considering them all equally. I have no idea who I'm going to support or who will even apply, and I want it to be a very open process, and know that I know how extremely important this decision is. Majority of the council here made that decision 5 years ago. I know Councilmember Abraham is going to be for sure leaving us in a couple weeks, unfortunately, as she's retiring, but 3 members of council will have been through this process before, and so we know the consequences of picking the right and the wrong person, so it's extremely important.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton. Councilmember Hoderick.
The prior city manager selection to the one that you helped us with 5 years ago, we tripped on not doing a good enough background check. So background checks, we fought hard to restore our ethical standard here in the city of Troy that we had always been known for. That's been a big piece of this past 5 years, and we don't want to get back on any sort of a slippery slope. So can you tell us a little bit about the background check process that you go through?
Sure. GovHR does some standard stuff with background plus a little bit extra. The standards are criminal, credit, education verification, as well as driving. So those are standard records that are pulled, and we give you a report on how those check out. We'll do that with all of your finalists, not just the final candidate, but all the finalists. We'll also do the references that they give us, and then one of the things that we pride ourselves on, since we've done searches in 48 states, we need the last 2, and there's 28 consultants of us, just talking about the network. City management is a relatively tight network. What do we know about these finalist candidates? And so all of the consultants at GovHR send that final list. I get them weekly of other searches everywhere and say, okay, what have you worked with these folks? Can you give us a little bit of your professional thoughts on it? That's where we stop. Some clients do go the next step and do engage, whether it's a further background investigation by a private investigator or their own police department. Those are rare, but they do happen. I can think of one locally that does that too. We can certainly talk about that. I think there are pros and cons, and that would only be on probably your final candidate that you would take that next step. But I'll be transparent on how well we may or may not know the candidates, and we can talk about if there's a plus step. But all the first stuff I talked about is included in our standard process.
Thank you. Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. So, James, you mentioned, working with Jeanette and with Lori for the search going forward. I just want to make sure it's a delicate balance because council has two employees, a city manager and a city attorney. And so while I always enjoy working with Jeanette, it's usually through either Mark or Lori. And I guess my question is if you are soliciting feedback or questions to council, how is that going to work? Is that through Jeanette, which feels slightly awkward because you're technically not our direct employee? Or would it go through Lori, which is also slightly awkward, but in a different sense, even though she is our employee?
Yeah. From my perspective, I will work with both of them directly on what I need to do the back part of the search and the end part of the search, which is the contract end. In terms of communication with City Council, I can work through either of them. It is really up to you in terms of who you want bringing information to you. I can also work directly, and it probably makes sense to copy at least one of them or a city employee on those correspondence. Of course, those would be in the forms of reports. It would never be an asking of opinion or feedback. Any of that information that I would be distributing directly. If there's something that I need back from you, so, hey, take a look at this, make a decision at a future meeting, that would be one where I would ask this body to tell me who to work through. And I am very comfortable working with both of them, have had really great relationships with both of them. I don't think there's that many instances of that. Okay. I think a lot of this, we're going to come together in meetings and I'm going to be there and facilitate it. And the front end stuff that Jeanette's going to help me with and the back end stuff that Lori's going to help me with, I'm pretty comfortable. So I'm happy if you'd like to appoint one as the point person, but I also know that that's not going to be used very often in terms of communicating with you.
All right, and then one other question. You are very correct in saying this is we have the privilege and benefit of having a pretty long runway to May 31st. I've seen transitions where the overlap was too short, and I've seen transitions where the overlap was much too long, and it leads to unnecessary churn or just a difficult competing leaderships. What, in your professional view, is that sweet spot? Because I'm afraid of pulling the trigger too late, but I'm also afraid of pulling it a little bit too early.
It's a hard question.
Okay, sorry.
In a perfect world, if you have, I'm going to call it 4 weeks to work with, and if it becomes evident to the new city manager, and I think you would want to empower that person when appointed, that they believe that the transition needs to happen without the current city manager earlier than that 4-week period, that understanding's gained by the current city manager and the new city manager and the city council at appointment. I think that's an honest conversation that should be had first thing out of the gate. And if there needs to be a time where the current city manager steps back and is available just in a advisory role, that everybody's on that page when the appointment occurs, say 4 weeks in advance. So that if in week 3 it's, we just don't both need to be here. It's more of an advisory role. I think that's the only advice I have, is to have that honest conversation early. the benefit of being able to communicate with the current city manager is really big, but there's also that time where it's time to transition, and you want your employees to really understand what that looks like. And I think hopefully Mark, myself, the new candidate, would be able to communicate that to the employees too, the roles that everybody is playing for that crossover period.
Yeah, Mark.
Mayor and Council, just point of information, I've been looking at my personal plan to exit, and I do anticipate in the month of May, once the budget is approved, to start taking leave time. So I would be, taking leave time, and that might be helpful in the transition because, I have also seen other city managers where neither of them want to have it. But I guess the point I'm just trying to make is that when that May time period hits, I'm going to be taking some leave time and preparing to leave. I won't be in the office all the time just because I'll be using my leave time.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Abraham, are you
I'm all set.
good for now? Any other question? Councilmember Erickson Gall.
Thank you, Mayor. I was happy to see in the proposal that you would be doing community engagement. I think that's critical whenever we make a big step like this. Based on your past experience, how do you envision that happening?
Sure. Primarily, though, I am absolutely open. Again, we'll customize the search, and I'm really open if we can get even earlier information from the public. But we would definitely host a public interaction opportunity. Usually it's with the final candidate, finalist candidates. So that's a candidate pool that you've whittled down to, say, about 3 to 5. Where we would ask the public to come in, they could meet them, they could provide feedback directly on cards or digitally to me, which will be packaged up for your consideration before you ultimately review for final those 3 to 5 candidates. I'm happy to talk about focus groups. I'm also happy to talk about surveys if we want to get some public surveys. We've done both of those interactions. The survey tends to be less fruitful, if I'm honest. People don't know the city manager that well. But if there's a group of stakeholders in the community, whether they sit on boards or commissions or business chambers, I would really encourage that list to come together, and I would have one-on-one stakeholder meetings or group stakeholder meetings with those individuals. It's not quite getting to the citizen level, but a lot of folks aren't as familiar with the city manager as maybe those people that we can identify up front. So it's a stakeholder and then a more open meeting where they can provide feedback. And really that's going to be their meeting with the candidate for 30 minutes, and it'll provide you some feedback, but it's really targeted stakeholders, and we need to be clear about what that list looks like.
And I think that is critical, but what I was thinking more of is community engagement. Early on in your proposal, it talked about community forums for gathering in feedback and input early on. And I was wondering, how has that worked when you've done that?
Yeah, in the past, if we would pick a date, we would invite individuals in, and it would be a facilitated discussion around what they desire to see, the qualities, skills, and traits in the next city manager, and that's how it would be. It would be an open meeting at a certain time. But again, I would encourage invitation to those individuals that you think would be most valuable in the room.
And approximately what time in the timeline would you expect to be? And I'm asking this because I'm thinking that could probably be something that could be happening almost immediately rather than waiting until the new council has got their sea legs.
You're absolutely correct, very early. So we could do that in the month of November, certainly, as long as we provide enough notice and we have the room ready. That's an early opportunity, you're right.
And then would there also be opportunities for the public who don't necessarily want to come in person to be able to submit input through email or?
Yep.
whatever.
We'll provide a very specific form that they can complete, and then it would be, it would come to my inbox, using a traditional tool like SurveyMonkey to allow them to express themselves with the context that we're looking for.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a quick follow-up to that, Jim. We didn't do, I don't think, a forum on what we're looking for in a city manager 5 years ago because it was a different circumstance, but do you glean a lot of good information from people about that? To me, it seems a little bit like, I think, other than the people sitting here tonight, most in our city don't really understand the role of a city manager, or a form of government for that matter. I mean, so what kind of information are you getting? I'm all for community engagement, you know, I've talked about it for 8 years, but what do you get from something like that before we add something to it?
Sure. I don't know that the benefit is what I'm getting in terms of understanding the type of individual, the skills and traits and background that would best serve the community. I think that's going to come from the individual stakeholders. But what I do think it provides is an opportunity for people to express themselves, maybe learn what a city manager does, maybe learn about the form of government, maybe learn about the role that this council is playing in hiring the next. So it's more of a education opportunity than a feedback opportunity. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit counterintuitive, but that's just my opinion on it, and be happy to host one within that context, knowing.
Let's go. Community engagement goes both ways, right?
Yeah,
I think that's
sure.
good. I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood Ben a little bit. So, additional questions for James or for Mark? I see Mark has his hand up, but.
Yep, I'm really trying to stay out of this, but your interaction with the council members, do you going to need some study meetings that we'll have to schedule coming up, or are you going to contact them individually? I'm just looking at if I need to schedule some meetings in the upcoming future. And when I say meetings, I mean actual council meetings.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Public meetings.
Early on, it'll be stakeholder meetings, one-on-one with me and each of the members of the elected body. Later on, if I'm working my timeline back and my chicken scratch on here, we will have some special council meetings that we will need, but that won't happen until the candidate pool's received, and I'm actually able to present the candidate pool. And we are able to do that as a closed session meeting as long as we aren't interviewing or looking at candidates individually.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark.
We're about ready to put together our schedule for next year, so do you think it'd be worthwhile to try to guess when those would be, or wait? Or if you don't know?
I'm happy to guess a date and see if we can hit it.
Well, sometimes we find it's better if we get it in our calendars.
Sure, I'm happy to out of this meeting, piece back that May 1 backwards.
Okay.
Recognizing we could change them or schedule them as we see fit. Right?
Troy
That's the thing.
pre-schedules its
We do
meetings
that,
more
so, yeah.
than any other community I'm with, and it's appreciated.
I have another question for you. I have a follow-up. It's actually back to what Councilmember Abraham had asked about the kind of division of labor between our city attorney and our HR director, who, again, I love working with Jeanette, but we don't get to on a regular basis because that's not the way we work. And I'm trying to, because Jeanette reports to Mark and or Bob, I'm not sure exactly at this point, and Lori reports to us, I don't know, and maybe it's a question for Mark and or Lori and Jeanette, how that, do we need to formalize something relating to this? Because we've had a little bit of conversation about what James thinks will work, but I'm not overly comfortable that that's set in stone, and I don't want a situation where the city manager feels like the city attorney is using employees in a different way, and I'm sensitive to all of that. Obviously, it's all for the good of the city, and I think that's what everyone needs to remember, but I want to make sure that there's a clear delineation as best as possible in a way that they're comfortable and we're also comfortable, and maybe we haven't given you enough information to figure that out tonight, how it would be, but that's not part of this resolution, and I don't know if it could be a next step or an understanding, just so all the parties involved are on the same page up front. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm going to defer to the elected body in terms of who you'd like me to work with. I think it can be handled where you direct Lori as your employee to work with me in whatever way is necessary to accomplish the goals, and then you ask of the city manager that he directs the HR director to work with me in whatever goals have to be achieved. It still leaves one more piece that was brought up before, is who ultimately, if I need to get something to you, do you want me to report that through? And again, I don't think that's going to happen often, but I'm very sensitive to your point, Mayor. Let's clear it up. If it's not at this meeting, a very soon meeting after, where you can tell me who ultimately will be my bridge to the elected body.
I mean, you've directly corresponded with each of us in the past on other issues. I'm trying to think if there would be an issue with that in this context. I don't see that as an issue unless I'm missing something from a legal standpoint or from a management standpoint. City Attorney Bloom.
So as the person who has been the council liaison for the last 2 searches, I have had an opportunity to do this. I think clarification is absolutely essential. Unfortunately, I was not even aware that this was going to be put on the agenda until I saw it and read it in the agenda packet. So I think it is essential that there is communication and that it's clearly articulated who has which roles. I will tell you that some of the things that I did in the past were preparing the agenda items for the closed session. So working with James and getting you the closed session agenda items. So that would be one thing. Again, you can decide how you want to handle this. Certainly, we just need to make sure that it is clear. But I did a lot of the scheduling previously. I handled a lot of the notifications, the public forums that we had done in the past. I facilitated all of those meetings, found a room, did all of that. So I'm happy to, believe me, I've got an awful lot of work to do, and it is a lot of work, so I'm happy to defer if council wishes to do that. But it is an awkward situation, and it had, in the past, I think, served the city well to have me serving in that role.
Councilmember Hoderick. Thanks, Lori.
One of the reasons that we had the city attorney role and an outside consultant was to keep the selection of a new city manager, the optics of it, as neutral from, I'm not coming up with the right words, but Councilman Hamilton's, you're hearing what I mean here in my head, as fair and open. And, the fact is the HR director will be reporting to whoever that new city manager is. So we wanted to, there was a lot of mistrust in the community back then, and we wanted to make sure that there was no optic of an employee picking their new boss. Not that I think Jeanette would ever behave in that way, our HR director is, but the optics in the community were something that we were trying to manage. So as I recall, that was why the councils at that time, and this is a different council, I'm just sharing the past experience, why the city attorney became the appointed liaison. I believe the HR director was involved then as well in terms of providing background on information. It's not to shut our HR director out, who does recruitment for the city overall, but the key liaison was what was perceived to be a neutral person who reported directly to city council and was accountable to us. So unless there's a reason to change that, I felt that worked well from my perspective, and I just share that from having been through it before.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. I go back to my question. I still don't know how, and the next question is, I agree with what Councilmember Hoderick just said, only from the perspective of it. I don't want to change a system that worked well for me personally, but again, sure. Right. It is a different council, and I don't know what I don't know from 5 years ago also. So if that, I guess I'd need to be enlightened if there was any issue on that. But I am personally more comfortable sticking with that procedure. But again, this resolution doesn't speak directly to that. So I don't know, other than us talking about it tonight and putting it out there, I don't know if a decision needs to be made specifically to that, although I'm not opposed to doing that, depending on what other council members think. It's not part of the resolution, like I said, so it's not necessary, but it would potentially help give direction to James and staff moving forward. Does anyone else want to weigh in? Or not? Mark?
By offering Jeanette Medic, HR Director, I was just trying to help solve a problem. If your desire is to have the city attorney as the representative in this process, that's your decision. So I think it's pretty clear that's what you want.
Well, I think it's clear what I want and maybe one or two others, but I don't know that it's clear that everyone is comfortable with that. And so I guess that's what I'm trying to suss out. Councilmember Abraham.
I'm comfortable with sticking with the procedure that we had last time. It did serve us well. Maybe there is a better approach, but I know that worked, and I'd rather go with the reliable, tested path forward. Yeah, we're in a different place, but there are also times where we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So my recommendation is just to proceed with how we did last time. And Lori, sorry to give you a little bit more work to your full platter, but it did serve us well.
Councilmember Brooks, or, sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig?
Doesn't matter. You can go.
I'm happy to share, as someone who has not been through the process, what I can see, this is a laborious process. And if there is something that we've done before, and Lori, you're willing to do it, I say let's do with something that we've done, and there's something set, there is a path forward, and I'm all for not reinventing the wheel, so I'm happy to support that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. With Lori being the liaison, that makes sense. I don't think it's more of an optics thing. I don't even think it functionally really matters that much, but that's fine with me. Do we feel we're ready to move on? Yeah.
So now we have a liaison for an agreement we don't have yet. But
yeah, but do we feel we're ready to move an agreement tonight, or do we need legal review and come back in 2 weeks? I mean, I want to get this going as soon as we can, really, because time's going to go faster than we know, of course, as always. What is everyone's thoughts on that? It does say in the resolution here that it is recommended to have legal review of a request for proposal. So.
Mayor, may I speak?
Yes,
May I speak to
sure.
that? Thank you. It is very unusual the way that this contract has been presented to you. Normally, the process and procedure is to have our office review anything before it goes on that meets the definition of a contract that's required to be approved. So it is unusual to have this appearing. Like I said, it's just very unusual. Sometimes when you, well, first of all, the way that the resolution is drafted, it could appear that I had the authority to actually not, to find some problem with this contract, and then that would be undermining what your decision was. So I don't want to be in that position, but also I think that you lose some leverage when you approve a contract before the vetting. I think that there is some leverage that you get afterwards, that you get from approving the agreement ahead of time. That's not to say that I have any problems with this agreement. Again, I was at my seminar this weekend, but I did review the material. I think that there could be some additional clarification. I'm also a little bit concerned with the way that the memo was written, in that could actually be supplementing what's part of this. And this is really just a proposal, and it's not really a contract per se. It's a proposal with one page that says that we agree to the terms and conditions. So I personally recommend that again, we've got lots of time. The city manager has given a great deal of time. I personally would feel more comfortable if we had an opportunity to kind of make sure that all of those ducks were in a row ahead of time. But I will defer to council if you feel that it's important to move forward immediately. Again, it's just really a proposal that's in the agreement.
So just to clarify with council, do we have consensus that we all want option A to do the full external, internal? I believe we do.
Yeah, that was my question. We all want a full search, correct?
Right, so given that, James, is there any issue if we wait 2 weeks for full legal vetting of the request for proposal? That's not going to hurt our timeline at all, is it, to wait for the meeting in 2 weeks?
Now, I have, whether you take action this evening or 2 weeks from now, and in the interim, if we can certainly work with the city attorney in putting it in a form. If you approve the proposal, we can then condition on putting a contract together. That is fine. If you want to defer any decision until a contract's put together that meets our companies and the city attorneys, that's fine too.
I'm fine with whatever legal recommends, so I am going to support asking for the full legal review over the next 2 weeks and then come back with everything we need to make our decision and what you recommend for our path forward.
That's where I'm at. Council, are we good with that? I do have a question about the resolution. It does look like it says, and it could be, it just needs to be clarified, documents be reviewed and approved by the city attorney for acceptance and execution. That does sound like potentially you're deciding whether or not, and I just want to make sure the resolution is also vetted. I'm sure that's part of the process.
Absolutely. I will be vetting that as well.
Any other comments, questions about I-4? Councilmember Hoderick?
If anyone who's watching who's new to watching a city council look into selecting a city manager, this might have looked a bit laborious tonight compared to last time when we didn't even know. We had to select a consultant last time. We had to go through a process to just figure out who would handhold us and help us vet council candidates. And it was cumbersome, and yet we needed to be working very quickly. So the truth is, we're all here having a full, robust discussion about how to proceed. And we do have good experience with GovHR. GovHR is very familiar with the city, which is so important. So we're actually, even though we're delaying for 2 weeks to make sure we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's, on behalf of all of us, including GovHR, we're moving forward in a professional, experienced way, which is entirely different than every other city council replacement I've experienced watching in the city. And I'm very grateful, City Manager Miller. I want to say, it can seem almost uneventful for 5 years later to be talking about this in such a rote way. We are going to go through a very professional process involving all stakeholders in turning a page from this transition time to our next time in the city. And this is a positive place to be, and you can miss it if you haven't been through a time when it was not as seamless. I look forward to working through this process, and I appreciate City Manager Miller for giving early options, and I appreciate my colleagues for thinking through so carefully how we should proceed in the best interest of our fellow residents. This can be a very, very positive experience where people can learn a lot about how our government works, the city manager council form of government. I can remember it being very eye-opening for me many, many years ago now, learning about it through the selection of a city manager. So I encourage people to be engaged and be a part of it. We welcome that. It's a very important role. So thank you to my colleagues. I look forward to working with you all on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. And I actually just want to follow up a little bit on that with one thing here. We had this very interesting discussion about certain aspects, and none of us, and this is not really the night to do it, but Mark, we didn't really acknowledge the fact that you're retiring, and that is a big deal, and I know we went right into business. So again, it'll be another time for another meeting to talk about a lot about Mark Miller, but I do want to say, as one of the four up here who was here when you were appointed at a very, very difficult time, that'll never be lost on me or this city. So I want to make sure that's always the point. And I appreciate your attempt at trying to create a process for us that used your 24 years here at the city to kind of of experience to look at how things are going, and recognizing also in your same memo that it is our sole decision and we can essentially do what we want within the bounds of the law. But I appreciate that, and I do appreciate you for what you've done, especially those strange times in about 5.5 years ago. So we'll talk more about this in the future. In fact, probably in 2 weeks, we'll talk more about this. But for now, we'll move on. I-5 has been pulled by city management, so that concludes regular business this evening. Next up is the consent agenda. Does anybody have any item they'd like to pull from the consent agenda for further discussion? Councilmember Abraham.
I'd like to move all items on the consent agenda as printed.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Abraham, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we approve all items on the consent agenda as printed in the agenda packet. I don't think there was a list in the middle, was there? No. Any discussion? The vote was Dixon.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Motion carries. If you're here for an item on the consent agenda this evening, all of them have been approved. Next up are memorandums and future council agenda items. I do have one to announce tonight. K1 is an announcement of public hearing. October 16th, 2023, rezoning request, file number ZJPLN 2023-0016, proposed Encore Development rezoning, east side of Todd, south of Big Beaver, PIN 88-20-29-226-019 and -020, section 29 from R1C, one family residential, and P, vehicular parking to BB, Big Beaver zoning district. So again, that public hearing will be at our next meeting 2 weeks from tonight. And of course, for council, it's in for everybody, it's in our online agenda packet as well, the information. Next up is public comment for items not on the agenda from Troy residents and businesses. We have 4 people signed up this evening. 4 of you, or at least 3 of you, are familiar with the rules, and the 4th, you have 3 minutes as per our council rules. When your name's called, please come forward to the microphone. Remember, you're speaking to all of council. It's not a back and forth discussion. And when the light turns yellow, you have 1 minute left. And when it turns red, your time is up. So please be respectful of that time. And with that, we will start with our first resident, Terry McCormick.
Good evening, everyone. I can breathe a little easier because I thought it was 2 minutes, so we're all good here.
You can do it. If you can do it in 2 minutes, go ahead.
I will do that. So when I was teaching science at Smith Middle School, my students embraced our green team at school, kind of self-explanatory. Both Edna and Ellen will remember that because we had several conversations over a couple of years at awards ceremonies about how great it was that these kids were so innovative and so enthusiastic about being the next generation of good stewards in our world. But to do so, they need a stable world to inherit, and that's on all of us, especially our leaders. Read the news of just the last week. Major climate disasters inundating New York and New Orleans that will take billions, actually hundreds of billions of dollars, and decades of time to get under control. Why? Because they didn't prepare ahead of time. We must pay attention to the data. We know from the study session a couple of weeks ago that someone on city staff had the foresight needed to deal with these looming issues by taking step 1 of the Michigan Green Communities Challenge to create an internal sustainability committee for free. The challenge, which has been embraced by city staff and this council, outlines the next step as creating an external sustainability committee made up of community members that can create a community feedback loop and give you the community input that you want without the expense of hiring a consulting firm. Free. The upcoming annual day-long advanced planning session for 2024 is coming up quickly, as was noted. A sustainable path forward needs to be a big part of that agenda. Troy is being literally left in the dust by our neighboring communities, and it's critical that we do not end up paying a higher price than our neighboring communities because of our lack of initiative on this issue. We owe that much to the next generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Michelle Paulus.
Hey, all. First of all, I just want to take this opportunity to talk about what a great job you've done, Edna. I'm not going to get a chance to thank you for your service. I know none of you guys really get much for being here other than our love and aggravation. So I thank you very much for that. Also, I would like to say that in the forum yesterday or this week, I kept hearing community engagement and communications. And we've heard the promise about communications over and over again, and we'd like to hear more from you about what the heck is going on around here. And I can't wait to hear some announcement about your retirement. Yay, your retirement. It's great. And let's talk about the search. Let's talk about the search early on, like Ann said, and get people from inside our own community interested and maybe get creative from what we're looking at. And if we are not looking at sustainability as a criteria for decision-making for this new city manager, then we're not going forward into the future, whatever the saying is. Another question I just want to say is, I've hired a lot of people, and I have fired more people than I've hired. So I've been in the process of HR, and I've been in a lot of companies, I've never seen a situation where the lawyer is the key person who's servicing the process. If you don't trust the HR director to service this process, then you need a new HR director. I don't really mean that, but I do mean that it just is a process that should be a norm that you might want to look at. Is this is the person, because your lawyer should be doing lawyer job. Okay, that's my spiel. And I do want to thank you for the work that you do, and I offer any insights that you want in this HR process that you are interested in hearing from me.
Thank you. Next up is Fabrice Chmielauskas.
Hello, everyone. Well, great to see Senator Weber here, and I was very pleased to see that he voted yes on one of the 7 Senate bills as part of the climate package currently being considered in the Michigan legislature. And I was impressed. I should say, I think there are a number of people, including myself, who will support politically any politician of any party who will support a climate sustainability agenda. Now, when residents first came to this council last December to talk about increasing city capacity around sustainability, we were told that the advance guides the budget process, and it is very hard for council to make any type of new commitments if they weren't first discussed in the advance. Well, I'm told that Mr. Vitrano, I believe, may be organizing the advance, drafting the agenda for the advance now on December 2nd. And I understand that there are several important issues for the city, like revenue sources, like the new city manager search. And this is not just me saying so. All 6 candidates for city council in last week's election debate indicated as well that sustainability is also important. And so there should be enough time at the advance. We set aside a bunch of time for it to talk about that too. So I'm asking you to please set aside some time at the session for the advance to discuss city resources for sustainability. Now, the study session a couple weeks ago was a very good start. The advance will take place 3 months after the study session, so it could be a good moment to discuss what progress has been made so far during the past quarter. The city's internal staff sustainability committee should have found its footing by then and be deeply immersed in applying for the EECBG grant for developing a sustainability plan. It should understand what the grant will allow for, what it won't allow for, what would be the proper place for city residents to help broaden the internal committee, and what role they would take. Now also, as City Manager Miller noted at the study session, the city staff currently lacks expertise and capacity to work on sustainability. So maybe the advance can identify hidden pockets of resources to remedy this gap. In Royal Oak, local officials, as several of you have said there's no money. But then probe a little bit deeper, it turned out 4 departments turned out to be willing to allocate 1/4 of an FTE, full-time equivalent staff member, to the cross-cutting issue of sustainability that impacts their department. Maybe some positions have gone unfilled for months, and freeing up 1/4 of a staff member would not be an undue burden to those departments. All of a sudden, that created sufficient resources to hire 1 full-time sustainability manager for the city of Royal Oak. Here in Troy, departments of building, economic development, engineering, planning, public works, and purchasing are all departments that might pool together to purchase this resource. So I hope that you can use the advance to talk about possibilities like these. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Raphael Yashinsky.
Hello.
No.
First time here. I appreciate the patience. This is first time jitters. My proposal revolves around the idea that we could use perhaps some benches and shading, and I can provide a list of reasons why that would be valuable to the community. First benefit could be less drivers on the road, which could improve public safety and ideally alleviate traffic, which we all suffer from. Number 2, it could lead to a more physically active community, which is better capable and more independent in their mobility. And this should help both the older and younger ends of the population spectrum. In this, less parents needing to drive their kids to places, more people who are less capable of driving have more mobility options. There are financial incentives for this as well, including that cars are very expensive and have a lot of costs associated. Benefits of this include less money spent on cars means more money potentially spent at local businesses in the area. These are all benefits I feel are worth considering, and I leave at your discretion. With that, I think I've covered all of my points.
All right, thank you. Very, very nice to see you. Thank you for coming this evening. Sure thing. That concludes those that have signed up for public comment for items not on the agenda from Troy residents and businesses. Now's an opportunity for City Council or City Administration to respond and reply. City management shaking their head. Councilmember Hamilton?
Yeah, I'll just say sustainability will definitely be a priority of mine for coming up for the advance. It'll definitely be something I'll talk about and want to devote a good amount of time to. And you're more than welcome to come too. So,
thank you. And Councilmember Hoderick?
Sustainability is a huge priority and has been one of mine for years in my work here. So we'll continue to work that and appreciate the continued interest and involvement. And I do remember you working with the students and at the Youth Awards, and it was a very passionate thing, and I do share it more than you probably realize. And Raphael, it is so good to see you. I think the last time I saw you, you were a very young boy. Appreciate you coming in and sharing your thoughts with us tonight. It's good to see you. And all those thoughts are very, very definitely worth our consideration, and I've noted them, and I will give them my consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Any additional comments? Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you. Mr. Yashinsky, thank you for coming out tonight. It has been a long time. I recall you and your siblings organizing children to support the Troy Public Library 12 years ago, I think. You were quite young, but I really appreciate your passion has continued and branched out even from the library days. As Councilwoman Hoderick said, you made some excellent points, and certainly something to keep in mind as we deliberate on issues that we can impact and influence even within our own sphere. So thank you for coming out tonight. It was great seeing you. Sustainability is a topic with so many tentacles. It impacts every facet of our life, whether we recognize it or not, or realize it or not. It has been something that the city has put an importance on, maybe a little bit too quietly, and didn't get its due for all the work that it has done and continues to do. Certainly participating in the Green Challenge is no small effort. There's a lot of work to be done, and while a quarter head here or there doesn't sound like much, it is a big impact on the work that can get done here. I mean, there are trade-offs. If you're working on this, you're not doing other things. And so we appreciate city management trying to find a path forward in the ways that it can, while trying to take a very smart approach in creating a very meaningful path forward on sustainability. So I'm sure this won't shock my council colleagues, I won't be at the advance on December 2nd, but if I were, I'd be shocked if sustainability weren't a big part of that conversation. It has to be, but it has to be in a way that our community can understand and embrace, and so that it's meaningful to everyone, because if it's not meaningful to everyone, it's not going to gain the real traction that it needs. So, appreciate your comments, Terry, Michelle, Fabrice. I don't want you to think that your words are falling on deaf ears. It's not. We just want to move forward in a way that's authentic to our community, so that we all move forward together and it doesn't feel like we're pushing anyone or pulling anyone or dragging on anyone forward. That it's truly a community that is understanding and is moving forward together. So appreciate your comments. And Michelle, thank you for your very kind words. 8 years flies by very quickly.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Additional? I hesitate to speak after Edna. It's probably a huge mistake. So here I go, though. We throw out sustainability and we talk about it, and I understand the frustration of some in our community. I do want to just, maybe I'm taking the bait and I shouldn't be, but Ms. McCormick, I just want to be clear. This is step one of the Green Challenge. It's not the step one of the first time Troy's done anything with sustainability. And I don't want the community to be watching, happen to see your 3 minutes and think that. We have a 40-year history of doing a lot of work that probably isn't as well advertised or communicated as it should have been. But step one of a Green Challenge is one aspect. It is not step one of what this city has done for our environment or for sustainability or resiliency. Things that all 7 of us, all 90,000 of us care about. I do also, and I'm going to try to not be defensive, but Troy is not being left in the dust. I was at the State of the City for Sterling Heights next door a week ago, and you know what their big announcement was? It was that they're going to start doing single-serve recycling for all their residents. You know how many years we've done that? I mean, that's what Sterling Heights' big green announcement is, and I know they have a sustainability plan, and I know they have a commission that's an external commission, and that's awesome for Sterling Heights, but it doesn't mean that they're ahead of us on other aspects of actually doing the green work. And I just take issue with being said that we're being left in the dust, and I know you're coming from a really good and important place, and so, like I said, I'm taking the bait, which is probably a mistake, but I just want to make sure our high school students that are here understand this is not a new thing for the city of Troy. This is it's a new framing of how we're doing it in Troy, and that's really, really important. And again, cleaning up a record here, I trust our HR director, Michelle. It has nothing to do with trust of Jeanette or anybody in City Hall. I thought I was kind of clear about that. It's about a concern of how we interact with our city staff that actually aren't our city staff. That's our city staff right there, those two, right? So that was my concern, and I agree. I'd prefer our city attorney doing strictly legal work because that's her role. But in these unique times, once every 5.5, 6 years or so, when we need to have direct communication with our direct report, I think an exception is okay. Moving forward, if it looks different, that's, it's going to be up to a different council at some point. But that's where I'm coming from on that, and I thought that is where everyone on council was too. I better say something positive or I'm going to feel awful. I do appreciate the three of you coming forward. I mean, really it is. I expect to see you. I won't see, Michelle, you won't be here next meeting, you said, but I'm sure some of others will be. We'll continue to hear from you in a positive way, which is important for continuing to keep this top of mind. Obviously, you see that we're also working on replacing a city manager. I like the comments about, I assume there will be questions related to the city manager candidates about this issue in particular and how they would manage in that kind of sustainability in our city and the importance they feel. And I also expect that it'll continue to be talked about from this table very, very frequently. So, Mr. Yashinsky, also thank you. I loved hearing the history from my two colleagues to the left here talking about you and your value to this city. I appreciate you coming forward tonight and bringing those ideas and thoughts to us. It's really important that we hear from everybody in our community, and I thank you very much. And we'll also take that under consideration, everything you said. All right. There are no council referrals this evening. We have limited reports. Is there any comments on the minutes for the traffic committee? Anyone on council? I'm shocked. Next up is council comments. Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I had the privilege of being appointed to the Healthy Climate Task Force for the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, or SEMCOG as it's typically referred. We actually had our first meeting today. Going forward, I'm going to hopefully do more comprehensive written reports on this. This is a very exciting development. It is an opportunity for Troy, along with all of our other fellow members of SEMCOG, to take a regional approach to sustainability and climate issues. I would say that the big issues that I heard discussed today were dealing with the effects of climate change, especially the mayor of Grosse Pointe was there and talked about how the historic flooding that they experienced in 2021 and how that will not be a 50-year event, may be a 10-year event going forward. So there's a lot to be done on that. A big part of why this task force was put together is there's an opportunity to take part in $4.8 billion of grants from the EPA. This is going to move pretty fast because the first date they mentioned comes up in February and then in April. I'm hopeful Troy can be involved in that, but my impression, and I'll have more information on this soon, is that they're looking for sort of shovel-ready projects that can fit within this. So when I get the more detailed information, I'll pass along to City Manager Miller and hopefully we can look at some things that Troy can do to take advantage of that grant funding. Other issues that were discussed were protecting our watershed. Somebody mentioned the Rouge River, and I know here the Clinton River is also a very big, important thing. Using techniques to combat the heat that we will be experiencing going forward because of the effects of climate change. Transit, and backing up a little bit, one of the things they talked about is there's 2 phases. There are the Priority Climate Action Plan, which is what the grant funding would apply to, and that is projects that would be completed by approximately 5 years. And then would be able to be initiated as early as 2024. But also they're going to be looking at continuing this task force beyond that for comprehensive climate action plan. So there will be a short-term and a long-term focus. And there's also, we'll be looking at getting funding through other, these grants would be zero match. So our local communities that are selected to take part in it would not have to come up with our own funding. So that's an excellent thing as well. And I did highlight myself the potential, we talked about how, even though there's a zero match funding, how local communities funding and other sources of funding, and I highlighted the fact that we do have new transit millage in Oakland County, which we hope will play a part. Transit is definitely something that could be part of a short-term plan, since we're moving forward and trying to connect. Our hope is to have an Oakland County-based transit system. That was the point of the millage, but a regional system would be much more effective. And there was some talk of EVs, and somebody brought up an excellent point that EVs will never solve the issue of greenhouse gases, and transportation is the #1 source of greenhouse gas in Metro Detroit, with energy use, both residential and commercial, being the second. So it was a great meeting. We had a lot of wonderful discussions. Unfortunately, it was only 2 hours, but we'll be having another one in November, so hopefully we'll be moving forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Erickson-Galt, and thank you for serving on that important committee. That's good for us.
Yes.
Good for you, but good for us too. Additional council comments? Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to announce again that it's that time of year for the Nature Center's Nature Uncorked. It is the Nature Center's largest fundraiser, and it will take place on November 10th, Friday, November 10th, from 6 to 9 at the Community Center. Prices are $45 or $60 for VIP, and you can purchase your tickets online, and please support, because we love our Nature Center, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brooks. Anybody else? 2 quick things about announcement things. So this Wednesday at 8:30 in the morning, October 11th, is the Troy Chamber of Commerce Top of Troy Women of Influence event. And I'm bringing it up specifically today, this meeting, because our own Community Affairs Director, Cindy Stewart, is one of the panelists. And it's a great event that the Chamber does, but if you have any interest in seeing it, there's several good panelists on there discussing a lot of important things, their experience and where they are in their careers. But again, Cindy Stewart will be there, and as our Community Affairs Director, I think that's great. Go to troychamber.com and look for tickets if you're interested. And also, it's time for talk about, I thought you were going to say, when you said, it's that time of year again, the Frightful 5K. Right. It's the Frightful 5K time of year also. Big fan of that race. Obviously, as I've talked about for years, it is Sunday, October 22nd. It's coming up. And it is an opportunity, when part of Big Beaver shut down, you get to run around our Civic Center campus and onto Big Beaver. It's a cool run to do. You can register at rec.troymi.gov/frightful5k. And I just saw an email today that prices go up on the 16th, so 2 weeks from tonight. So if you register in the next 2 weeks, you'll get the early bird rate. I'll be there. I'm sure other council members might be there as well. But it's a good community event, and I think it's the first place I met Councilmember Hamilton when he was running and he was dressed like Alexander Hamilton. So that I'll always remember, if nothing else. But anyway, those two events I think are great events, and that's all I have specifically. So, all right, I don't see anybody has signed up for public comment for items on or not on the agenda for members of the public outside of Troy, and we have no closed session this evening. So with that, we're adjourned.